Did you know that Sigmund Freud had a crazy theory about female desire that they never told you about? Well, in this video, we're gonna explore it. And I'll give you my thoughts as a sex therapist on whether or not I think it has any merit. Now, his theories are highly controversial, but he proposed that the human psyche is made up of three parts: the ID, which is our primitive desires, the ego, which is our reality testing part of the brain, and the superego, which is our morality and what we were taught growing up. So stay tuned if you want to learn more. If you're new here, welcome. During the phallic stage, which typically occurs between the ages of 3 and 6, children become aware of the differences between males and females, and they begin to develop a sexual interest in the opposite sex. For boys, this stage is significant because it marks the beginning of what Freud called the Oedipal complex. He believed that the only way for a woman to achieve orgasm was through direct stimulation of the clitoris. So let me tell you what he thought about female orgasms, and then I'll give you my thoughts as a sex therapist. And he developed an instrument called the vibratory apparatus to stimulate the clitoris. He believed that this area was located about 2 inches inside the vagina, and that stimulation of this area could lead to a more intense and satisfying orgasm for women. However, despite Freud's theories, research has not been able to consistently identify a specific area in the vagina that corresponds to the G-spot. Some studies have found that the G-spot may actually be a myth. He believed that the clitoral orgasm was the most common type of orgasm for women, and it occurred when the clitoris was directly stimulated. He was one of the first people to really acknowledge that women had sexual desires and that they needed to be taken into account in order for women to have satisfying sex lives. His ideas around female orgasms were very specific, and they didn't take into account the range of experiences that women have when it comes to sex and pleasure. For example, Freud believed that all women could achieve vaginal orgasms if they were stimulated in the right way. However, research shows that only about 1/3 of women can experience vaginal orgasms. Freud also believed that the clitoris was the main source of pleasure for women, but research shows that many women also experience pleasure in other areas of their bodies, such as the breasts and the vagina. His ideas around the clitoris and the vaginal orgasm were particularly groundbreaking, and they helped to shift the conversation around female sexuality. It is important to remember that everyone is different, and that there is no one way to experience pleasure or orgasm. What works for one person may not work for another, and it's important to explore and experiment in order to find what feels good. He believed that this level of excitement could be reached through both visual and tactile stimulation, but ultimately, the goal was to reach the point where the woman was physically aroused enough to experience orgasm. He also believed that the vaginal orgasm was a more intense and satisfying type of orgasm that could only be achieved through penetration and stimulation of the G-spot. If you haven't already, please subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. Have a great day. Bye. Now, this was a huge deal at the time because it was one of the first attempts to really understand and explain female pleasure. Freud was one of the first people to really acknowledge that women had sexual desires, and that they needed to be taken into account in order for women to have satisfying sex lives. His ideas around the clitoris and the vaginal orgasm were particularly groundbreaking, and they helped to shift the conversation around female sexuality. Before Freud, women were often not even considered to have sexual desires, and if they did, it was assumed that they could only be achieved through intercourse. So let's talk about that now. But Freud's work helped to shift the conversation around female sexuality and helped to pave the way for future research and understanding. The Oedipus complex is a term coined by Freud to describe a child as unconscious sexual desire for their opposite parent and the accompanying rivalry with the same sex parent. According to Freud, boys experience a strong sexual desire for their mothers during the phallic stage, and they may even view their father as a rival for their mother's affection. This leads to a boy developing a castration complex, which is a fear that he will be punished by his father through castration. Eventually, the boy resolves this conflict by identifying with his father and internalizing his morals and values, which then leads to the development of his superego. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I make videos about sex, relationships, and everything in between. This is basically the opposite of the Oedipus complex, where girls desire the father and want to eliminate the mother as competition. According to Freud, girls develop penis envy during the phallic stage because they notice that they do not have a penis. They then become jealous of their father, who does have a penis, and they develop a sexual desire for him. This leads to the girl developing a castration complex, which is a fear that she will be punished by her mother, who she sees as having power over her through control of the genitals. Ultimately, the girl resolves this conflict by identifying with her mother and taking on the mother-s role as the homemaker and child-bearer. If this is your first video, please subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos. So, Freud was born in 1856 and died in 1939. He was an Austrian neurologist who is considered to be the founding father of psychoanalysis. Now, Freud believed that our behaviors and actions are often motivated by unconscious desires and unresolved conflicts from our past. Specifically, he had some interesting theories around female sexuality. In this video, I'm going to talk about one of them, specifically around female orgasms and how he believed that they occurred. But before I get into that, I want to acknowledge that a lot of what Freud theorized was based on his work with his patients, many of whom were upper-class European, women living in the early 1900s. So we have to take his theories with a grain of salt, because they were very much influenced by the time period and the population that he worked with. Also, a lot of his theories are considered sexist, and they don't take into consideration the diverse range of experiences and desires that exist for both men and women. With that said, let's dive in. So, Freud believed that the clitoris was the primary source of pleasure for women, and that the vagina was actually a secondary erogenous zone. This was very different from what was being taught at the time, which was that the vagina was the main source of pleasure, and that the clitoris was not even an important part of female sexuality. Now, most people probably know that Freud also came up with the psychosexual stages of development, which includes the phallic stage. However, Freud believed that girls go through a similar but different developmental stage that he called the Electra complex. Now, while Freud acknowledged that the clitoris is a source of pleasure for women, he believed that the main goal of female sexuality was to achieve orgasm. However, his ideas around female orgasms were very specific, and they didn't take into account the range of experiences that women have when it comes to sex and pleasure. Okay, so according to Freud, there were two types of orgasms that women could experience: the clitoral orgasm and the vaginal orgasm. Now, when it comes to the vaginal orgasm, Freud had some pretty specific ideas about what he called the Grafenberg spot. Another thing that Freud believed was that women needed to reach a certain level of excitement before they could experience orgasm. Now, these ideas may seem shocking today, but at the time they were groundbreaking. However, as a sex therapist, I have some thoughts on Freud's theories and whether or not I think they have any merit. So overall, I think that Freud's theories were a step in the right direction when it came to understanding female sexuality. However, I think that Freud's theories were also very limited by the time period in which he lived. Overall, I think that Freud's theories were a good starting point for understanding female sexuality, but they're definitely not the whole story. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends.